Welcome back. Today, we are going to tackle a topic that I get asked about a lot. What do you do when you have a client or a whole bunch of clients where you keep on going overtime, sometimes way overtime on sessions? Maybe your contracted session time is 45 minutes, but you consistently or often go to the 60-minute mark, for example. And while if you do this, if you go overtime once in a blue moon, that's fine, right? Sometimes some sessions just need to take longer, and it feels totally fine and generous to give that to our clients. But when this starts to become a consistent thing, it can really eat away at your time. Or maybe you're consistently going over session time and then you arrive late or frazzled to the next client session, or without having had a chance to rest or take a break or even go to the bathroom in between sessions. And when you consistently go over time in client sessions, you might even start to resent the clients that you're going over time with. So it can sometimes seem like just a small little thing to be going over in your session time, but over time, there's a buildup, and it can end up making a big negative impact when this happens over and over again. And so the question that I often get from my students is, how do you keep on time in your client sessions? And sometimes another question that I get is, if your client has gotten used to longer sessions, then how do you break them out of the habit? So we're going to cover all of that and more in our episode today. And to really get to the best solutions for this, we need to start here with this question that might sound simple and obvious, but much of the time, there's a lot more to this question than first meets the eye. And here's the question: why are you consistently going over time in your sessions? Now, at first glance, the answer might be because there was a lot that your client wanted to cover, or it might be because your client is really wordy, like I am, and it takes a while to get to the point, right? Those are just two examples. But let's look a little deeper, because in almost all cases, or in many cases, I should say, when practitioners are going over time, no matter what the surface reason is for going over time, there's usually also another reason lying underneath it. And that underlying reason is really the driving force of the going over time. And that underlying reason usually has very little to do with your client and the content of your coaching session, and much, much more to do with you and your beliefs and your fears. So let me give you some examples of what I mean by this. For example, if you hold a belief that you're not doing a good enough job with your client, then you might feel like you need to give extra time to make up for not doing a good enough job, or to look better, or to make your work valuable enough. Or if you hold a fear that a client is going to become angry at you if you don't answer all of their questions in a particular session, then you might end up going over time, even when you don't want to, in order to cover all of the topics that your client wanted to cover. Or if you hold a fear that your client is going to get insulted if you interrupt them when they're going off topic, then you might be letting them take up lots of time in a session, giving too many details or going on tangents that aren't actually necessary. Students of my Sacred Depths Transformational Practitioner training have heard me say so many times that energy follows energy. What that means here is that if you go into your client sessions with any of the beliefs or the fears that I just mentioned, then the decisions that you make in your coaching during the session are going to be dictated by those fears. And then you're most likely going to end up going over time. Now, again, I'm not talking about going over time every now and again. Sometimes there are very legitimate and appropriate reasons and moments to go over time, if both you and your client have that time. So it all starts with you. And what are the fears and the beliefs that you're bringing in? Now, back to this idea of energy follows energy. If you go into a client session believing that you're a good practitioner and that together you and your client are going to co-create a valuable session for them, then you're not going to feel as compelled to go over time in a session. Or if you go into your client sessions believing that it's more than okay to not get every question a client asks, to not answer every single thing, and that you and your client together have the ability to prioritize what's most important, then you're not going to need to go over time by covering all of the topics. Or if you go into your client sessions really believing that your client will appreciate you if you lovingly and respectfully and masterfully interrupt them if they go astray, then you're going to be more willing to lovingly and respectfully interrupt a client when they go off topic or talk too much instead of wasting session time. So I don't want you to underestimate this inner work that we must always be doing as practitioners. It is so key. Our own inner work is key to being able to better serve our clients. I still, after all of these years and decades of working with clients, of training practitioners, I still do my own inner work because of all of this. This is why in Sacred Depths, we always look at the practitioner inner work with every coaching topic that we look at. It's so, so important. So if you're consistently going over time on sessions, take just a quick moment for yourself. And the first question to ask is, what's the fear or the belief that's at the root of this? Right? So that's just a toe dip into that inner work that we need to do if we're going over time in sessions. What fear or belief is at the root of this? Now, I'm going to move on from the inner work for now because we could spend hours just on that. But instead, I want to move on to some things that you can say or do to stay within time on your client sessions once you have that energy that we've been talking about aligned, right? As you do that inner work. Okay, so here are some practical things to pair with the inner work. Number one, this is a huge time saver and so important. Get clear up front in a session on what the objectives and the intentions are for the session. A big mistake that a lot of practitioners make is they kind of just jump into a session without spending a few minutes in the beginning of the session getting clarity with their client on what their client actually wants to receive from the session. When there isn't an agreement between the coach or the practitioner and the client on what the objectives or what of the session are, what the client wants to get out of the session, it becomes so easy to meander, to fish around, to not get needs met, and the session can end up taking much longer. So the more at the beginning of a session that you can get clear on that with your client, the easier it is to stay within session time. And also the more effective the session is going to be. Sometimes intentions can change for a client throughout the course of a session. That's fine, so long as you're tracking, right? That's going to happen sometimes. Sometimes getting clear on intentions can be really, really simple as asking, what is it that you'd like to receive? And then you go from there. But sometimes it can be trickier because a client isn't sure, or they might answer you, but they're not really answering with an intention. It's kind of murky. In Sacred Depths, we go deep into how to really help a client get clear on what they really want from a session. Okay, so that's number one, get clear up front on intentions. Here's another thing that can really help you stay within time in your sessions. Let your client know up front if you don't sense that there's enough time for all of their intentions, and then give them choices. So oftentimes what happens, and we mentioned this a little bit earlier in this episode, is a client will say, I want to do this, and I want to do this, and I want to do this, and I want to do this. And the coach or the practitioner already knows from the get-go that it's going to take way longer than the amount of time they have allotted. But they don't say anything, and then they feel like they have to get through all of the things. You can, and it is very, very appropriate to let a client know that you're going to try to get through all of the intentions. If they, mention many things that will take a long time, you can let them know you're going to try your best to get through all of the things, but you're not sure that you will with the time that you have for your session. And then ask them, what are their priorities, right? So what are the things that you want to make sure we look at first that we definitely cover in our time together today? Just doing that simple thing, setting up that expectation if you need to at the beginning of a session can really, really help. Here's another thing to consider that can help you stay within time in your sessions. I mentioned it a little bit earlier. Be willing to interrupt. Be willing to interrupt. It can be a gift sometimes when done in the right moment and done with love and done masterfully to interrupt a client who has gone off topic or gotten too much into the weeds. I have had many, many, many clients thank me for doing this. Of course, there are certain moments when it's not appropriate to interrupt. Even if a client has gone off topic or is into the details, if it's something that or you sense they really need to be seen and heard in that moment, right? But oftentimes that's not the case. And we want to always use all of our listening skills with this. Okay, 2 more tips for you on being able to keep to session time. If you are getting close to the end of your session time and there's still a bunch of things that you were going to cover in the session, you're not going to have that time left, let people know. So you can say something like, we have 10 minutes left. And here's what I think would be most important to cover in that time. Does that feel right for you? Or we have 10 minutes left, and I know you still wanted to look at A and you still wanted to look at B. What's the priority for today? Sometimes if we don't cover everything in a session, or there's just more on a particular topic to look at, I'll always acknowledge, right? And then either I'll make a plan with my client to discuss it next time or over email. Or I also love to give coaching journaling questions at the end of a session, to give journaling questions on topics that we didn't have time to go deeper on. So that the client can do the work in between the sessions. They can share that work with me, and then we pick up on it next time. Last piece for now on how to keep within session time. Be at the top of your game when it comes to your coaching skills. When people first come into Sacred Depths and they observe me coaching, I do model coaching, they're usually blown away at how quickly I'm able to get so deep with clients and to the heart of the matter. And people that observe me coach are often shocked at what a wealth of awareness and decisiveness can come in such a short amount of time. And I always say to people, it might look like magic, but it is not magic. It's about skills. The more masterful you become in your listening skills, your questioning skills, your creating awareness skills, your befriend your fear skills, your strategizing skills, et cetera, the more you learn also to add the somatic level to the cognitive level of coaching, then the more likely you're going to be to meet each session's intentions in the allotted amount of time. Okay, so first to review, we covered 5 different strategies for keeping to session time, and actually 6, because the first was all about the inner work, right? And getting to the root of your own fears and beliefs. And then from there, we looked at getting clear on intentions up front. We looked at letting clients know upfront if we don't sense that there's enough time for all of their intentions, and then giving them choices. We looked at being willing to interrupt our clients in appropriate moments. We looked at what to do if end time of the session is coming close and there are still things to cover. And then we looked at being at the top of our game when it comes to our coaching skills. There was one more thing, a little extra bonus that I wanted to cover with all of you today on this topic. And it's the following question. What do you do? A lot of people often ask me this. They say, what do I do if my client has gotten used to these longer sessions and they're just expecting me to give them, say, 60 minutes instead of 45 minutes? And I'm ready to change that, but what do I do? If you've been consistently going over time, like, for example, going 60 minutes when really you're contracted for 45, your client might just come to expect the 60 minutes from you each time. They may have even forgotten that the sessions are supposed to only be 45 minutes. And so before you just jump to going back to 45 minutes, you want to address this with your client so that there's no confusion or upset or false expectations. And you can do this either voice to voice or over an email. And you can share something as follows. You can say or write to them, over the last months, our sessions have consistently gone 15 minutes over time. And I take full responsibility for that. I'm the one who holds time in our sessions, and I've gotten a little lax with that. And I want to apologize to you for that, because that's not honoring your time. And moving forward, in order to honor both my time and yours, as well as to honor our coaching agreement, I'm really going to do my best to stick to 45 minutes for our sessions. And of course, there might be an exception to this that comes up every now and again. And if we need to extend the session by a few minutes and we both have the time, I'll be more than happy to do that. Right? So you share, right? You take responsibility, and then you share what it's going to look like moving forward, and you reassure. The other thing I'll just quick mention here is that oftentimes practitioners think that they're doing their clients a favor by going over time. And sometimes it is, but that being said, it's actually not a trauma-informed practice to go over session time unless your client has agreed to it. So what can sometimes happen is that a practitioner just makes an assumption that the client wants to go over time and has that extra time. And so the practitioner just goes over time without acknowledging it or asking if it's okay. And then the client feels beholden to stay on the Zoom line or on the phone when really maybe they have another appointment to get to, or they have to go to the bathroom, or whatever it is. And but they just don't say anything because they don't want to hurt the practitioner's feelings, or they feel like they have to stay on, or they don't want to look like they're not appreciative. And so if I am ever going to consider going over time in a client session, I will ask my client, I will say, I've got an extra 10 minutes right now, and I'm happy to hang on so that we can complete this topic, whatever it is. I'll say, is that something that you'd like to do? I like to get consent, in other words, before I go over time. All right, there you have it. Speaking of time, we are coming to the end of our time today. We covered a lot in this episode in a pretty short amount of time. And I hope that you learned a lot and received inspiration along the way. If you enjoyed this episode, I would so appreciate it. And it would just be so helpful if you left a good review. And as always, I love to hear from you, and I love to hear what this podcast sparks for you. Please be in touch. Let me know what you took from our time together today. I want to hear, I want to get to know you, and I will see you next time.